The crash. The ship jolted violently, throwing Sergeant Daniel Carter against the cold metal wall. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and the acrid smell of burning circuits filled the air. He scrambled to his feet, gripping a rail to steady himself. The ship was under attack, and judging by the chaotic shouts coming through his communicator, things were going from bad to worse. "Security teams, report." Daniel barked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Multiple impacts on the hull, sir," came a crackling response. "Engines are failing. We're going down." The voice cut off, replaced by a loud explosion that shook the entire vessel. Daniel's heart pounded, but he pushed down his fear. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't panic. He made his way toward the escape pods, his boots clanging against the trembling floor. As he reached the pod bay, a high-pitched scream stopped him in his tracks. Turning, he saw Princess Villara, the alien diplomat his team was assigned to protect. Her pale blue skin was streaked with soot, and her silver dress was torn. She was pinned under a fallen support beam, her glowing purple eyes wide with terror. "Help me," she cried, her voice sharp with desperation. Daniel hesitated for only a second. Protocol said to save himself in situations like this, but leaving her wasn't an option. Gritting his teeth, he rushed to her side. The beam was heavy, but adrenaline gave him strength. He pushed it off with a grunt, pulling the princess free just as another explosion rocked the ship. "Can you walk?" he asked, steadying her. She nodded shakily, but her legs gave out as soon as she tried to stand. Without a word, Daniel hoisted her into his arms and sprinted toward the nearest escape pod. The ship groaned around them, metal twisting and buckling under the strain. They barely made it inside the pod before the door sealed shut. Daniel hit the launch button, and the pod shot away from the dying ship. Through the small viewport, he saw the massive star cruiser break apart in a fiery explosion. Debris scattered across the void like glowing embers. His stomach clenched as he realized they were now drifting toward an unknown planet below. The pod entered the atmosphere with a deafening roar. Heat flared outside, and the entire cabin shook violently. Villara clung to her seat, her face pale. Daniel gripped the controls, trying to steady the descent, but the pod's systems were failing. All he could do was brace for impact. The crash was brutal. The pod smashed through thick jungle foliage before slamming into the ground. Daniel's head snapped forward, and darkness threatened to consume him. For a moment, he was still, the only sound the hiss of steam escaping from the damaged pod. With a groan, Daniel unbuckled his harness and checked on Villara. She was unconscious but breathing. A thin line of blood ran down her temple, but otherwise she seemed unhurt. He let out a breath of relief before turning his attention to their surroundings. The pod was a crumpled mess, and smoke billowed from the engine. Outside, the jungle was dense and alien. Giant, twisting trees loomed overhead, their leaves glowing faintly in the dim light. Strange sounds echoed from the shadows, clicks, growls, and unearthly howls that sent a shiver down his spine. "We're not alone," he muttered to himself, grabbing a small survival kit from the wreckage. Villara stirred, groaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open, and she winced as she tried to sit up. What happened?" "We crashed," Daniel said, handing her a canteen of water. "Take it slow. We need to move." She looked around, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. "This planet, it's cursed." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Cursed? What are you talking about?" "It's a dead world," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My people abandoned it centuries ago. No one who lands here survives." "Great," Daniel muttered, slinging the survival kit over his shoulder. "Then we'd better not stick around." He helped Villara to her feet, supporting her as they stepped out of the pod. The jungle was even more intimidating up close. The air was thick and humid, carrying a faint metallic tang. Strange plants glowed softly, their tendrils swaying as if alive. In the distance, something large crashed through the undergrowth, and Daniel tightened his grip on the small blaster he'd salvaged. "Can you sense anything?" he asked. Velara was known for her empathic abilities, able to pick up emotions from miles away. She shook her head, frustration flickering across her face. "No, I can't. It's like something is blocking me." Daniel frowned but didn't press the issue. They needed to find higher ground and figure out how to signal for rescue. Every instinct told him they were being watched, but by what, he couldn't say. As they made their way through the jungle, Velara suddenly froze, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" Daniel stopped, listening. At first, there was nothing but the rustle of leaves. Then he heard it, a low guttural growl, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. His blood ran cold. "We need to move," he said, his voice low but urgent. Before they could take another step, the bushes ahead exploded outward, and a massive, six-legged creature emerged. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them, and it let out a bone-chilling roar. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Velara's hand. As they fled into the unknown, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was yet to come. Unlikely allies. Daniel pulled Velara behind him, his heart pounding as the creature crashed through the jungle, snapping branches like twigs. The ground shook with each step of its 6 powerful legs. It wasn't just chasing them, it was hunting them. "Keep running," he shouted over his shoulder. Velara stumbled but kept up, her breaths ragged. "Where are we even going?" "Anywhere but here," Daniel growled, scanning the jungle for anything that could give them an edge. Up ahead, he spotted a cluster of boulders forming a small alcove. It wasn't much, but it might give them cover. He veered toward it, pulling Velara along. As they ducked behind the rocks, the creature barreled into the clearing, sniffing the air with a grotesque, twitching snout. Daniel motioned for Velara to stay quiet, raising a finger to his lips. His grip tightened on the small blaster in his hand. He knew the weapon wasn't designed to take down something this big, but it was all they had. The creature's glowing red eyes scanned the area, its massive claws digging into the dirt as it prowled closer. Daniel's breath hitched as it sniffed the air again, pausing just feet from their hiding spot. "Do something," Velara hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's mind raced. He grabbed a small stone and threw it as hard as he could toward the opposite direction. The rock clattered against a tree, and the creature whipped around with a roar, charging after the noise. "Move," Daniel said, pulling Velara to her feet. They bolted deeper into the jungle, their path lit only by the faint glow of the alien flora. The sounds of the creature faded, but Daniel didn't dare slow down. They needed distance and a plan. Finally, they reached a small clearing. Daniel stopped, panting heavily, and let Velara collapse onto the soft grass. Her silver dress was torn, and her blue skin was streaked with dirt. She looked exhausted, but her eyes still burned with defiance. "This is your fault," she snapped, glaring at him. Daniel raised an eyebrow, wiping sweat from his brow. "My fault. I saved your life back there. If you had done your job and protected the ship, we wouldn't be here." Velara shot back, her voice sharp. Daniel clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue. There wasn't time for blame. "Listen, Princess," he said, kneeling to her level. "We're stuck on a hostile planet with no backup, no supplies, and no idea what's out there. We need to work together if we're going to survive." Velara's expression softened slightly, but she still looked unconvinced. "And what makes you think I need your help?" Daniel gave a dry laugh. "Because I'm the one with the gun." Before Velara could respond, a distant roar echoed through the jungle. The creature was still hunting them. Daniel stood, scanning the area. "We need higher ground," he said. "If we can find a vantage point, we might be able to signal for rescue." Velara frowned, but she nodded. "Fine. Lead the way." As they made their way uphill, the terrain grew steeper and more treacherous. Villara struggled to keep up, her royal upbringing evident in her lack of physical endurance. Daniel slowed his pace, offering her a hand when she stumbled. She accepted grudgingly. "You're not like the others," she said after a while, her tone thoughtful. Daniel glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "Most humans I've met are different, arrogant, reckless. But you're calm, focused." Daniel shrugged. "I'm a soldier. It's my job." Villara tilted her head, studying him. "And yet, you risked your life for me. Why?" Daniel didn't answer right away. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "Doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. We're in this together now." Villara looked away, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the only sound was the crunch of their boots on the rocky ground. As they reached a ridge, Daniel spotted something in the distance, a faint glow coming from what looked like a structure. He squinted, trying to make out the details. "What is that?" Villara asked, her voice tinged with hope. Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. Could be a settlement, or it could be a trap." Villara's eyes narrowed. "We don't have much choice." Daniel nodded reluctantly. "Let's check it out, but stay alert." They began their descent toward the glowing structure, every step heavy with caution. The jungle grew quieter, as if holding its breath. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they approached, the structure came into view, a large dome-like building made of a strange metallic material. It looked ancient, covered in vines and moss, but the glow from within suggested it was still active. "This doesn't feel right," Daniel muttered, gripping his blaster. Villara stepped closer, her eyes wide with wonder. "This architecture, it's from the old empire. My people must have built this." Before Daniel could stop her, she moved toward the entrance, her curiosity overriding her caution. The doors slid open with a low hiss, revealing a dimly lit interior. "Villara, wait," Daniel called, but it was too late. She stepped inside, and the doors began to close behind her. Daniel lunged forward, just managing to slip through before they sealed shut. Inside, the air was cold and still. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested a small, pulsating device. "What is this place?" Villara whispered, her voice filled with awe. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to leave, but before he could say anything, a low growl echoed from the shadows. They weren't alone. The hidden enemy. The growl reverberated through the ancient structure, low and menacing, like a predator toying with its prey. Daniel stepped in front of Villara, his blaster raised and his muscles tense. The dim glow of the symbols on the walls made it difficult to see, but he could feel eyes watching them from the shadows. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his stomach. Villara, her earlier defiance replaced with unease, nodded and clutched the edges of her torn dress. "This place, it wasn't meant to be found again," she murmured. Daniel ignored her, his focus trained on the darkness. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. For a moment, there was no response, only the oppressive silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was humanoid but far from human. Its skin was a dark, mottled gray. Its eyes glowed a pale yellow, and it carried a weapon that looked like a mix of a spear and an energy rifle. The creature's movements were slow and deliberate, exuding confidence. Behind it, more figures emerged, their weapons gleaming faintly in the eerie light. Daniel counted 4, maybe 5, but there could have been more lurking unseen. He tightened his grip on his blaster. "What do you want?" Villara demanded, stepping out from behind Daniel. Despite her fear, there was a regal authority in her voice. The lead figure tilted its head, as if considering her. Then it spoke, its voice guttural and alien, but laced with an unnerving intelligence. "Princess Villara," it rasped, its pronunciation of her name startlingly precise. "You should not have come here." Villara stiffened. You know who I am. The creature chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. We know, and we have waited. Waited for what? Daniel interjected, stepping forward. If you've got something to say, say it. The creature turned its glowing eyes to him. The human protector, it said with disdain. Always so bold. Always so blind. Daniel narrowed his eyes, his finger hovering over the trigger. Try me. Villara grabbed his arm, her touch surprisingly firm. Don't, she said softly. Turning back to the creature, she asked, Who are you? What is this place? The creature's expression shifted to something almost like a smile. We are the keepers, it said. The last guardians of a weapon your people sought to control. A weapon that destroyed this world. Villara's face paled. That's not true. My people would never. Silence. The creature roared, its voice echoing through the chamber. Your ancestors brought ruin here, and now you return to finish the job. Daniel took a step forward, keeping his blaster aimed at the leader. Listen, we're not here to cause trouble. Our ship was attacked, and we crashed. That's it. We don't want your weapon. The creature sneered. Lies. Your arrival was no accident. You were drawn here, just as the stars foretold. Villara's eyes widened. The stars. Before she could say more, the creature raised its weapon. Enough. The princess must die. Her blood will appease the spirits of this world. Daniel reacted instantly. Over my dead body, he growled, pulling the trigger. A bolt of energy shot from his blaster, striking the leader in the chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall, its armor absorbing most of the impact. The room erupted into chaos. The other keepers charged, their weapons humming with energy. Daniel shoved Villara behind the pedestal and fired off another shot, taking down one of the attackers. Stay down, he shouted, ducking as his spear-like weapon narrowly missed his head. Villara clutched the pulsating device on the pedestal, her fingers trembling. Daniel, this device. Not the time. Daniel barked, firing again. The keepers were relentless, their movements quick and coordinated. Daniel was forced to retreat toward the pedestal, his back pressed against the cold metal. He was outnumbered, and his blaster was running low on energy. Villara, we need an exit, he said, his voice strained. Villara's eyes darted around the room, her mind racing. She suddenly noticed a series of symbols glowing on the wall behind the pedestal. Those symbols, they're a map, she exclaimed. A map to what? Daniel demanded, dodging another attack. To the weapon's core, she said. And maybe a way out. Daniel fired his last shot, taking down another keeper, but the blaster fizzled, its power depleted. Then start decoding, princess, because we're out of options. Villara placed her hands on the glowing symbols, her fingers moving instinctively. The device on the pedestal began to pulse faster, its light intensifying. The keepers hesitated, their yellow eyes narrowing. What are you doing? The leader growled, its voice filled with alarm. Ending this, Villara said, her voice firm. The ground beneath them trembled, and a hidden door slid open in the far wall, revealing a narrow passageway. Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed Villara's arm and pulled her toward the exit. As they ran, the keepers roared in fury, but they didn't follow. Instead, the leader's voice echoed after them, chilling in its finality. You cannot escape your fate, princess. The stars have already spoken. Daniel and Villara emerged from the passage into a dark, winding tunnel. The faint glow of the symbols guided their way, but the air was heavy with tension. Daniel glanced at Villara, who clutched the pulsating device tightly. You better have a plan, he said, his voice low. Villara met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I don't know what's waiting for us, she admitted. But if they're right about the weapon, we might not have a choice. Daniel sighed, his jaw tightening. Then let's keep moving. Whatever's out there, we face it together. Trust is earned. The tunnel was narrow and cold, the only light coming from the faint glow of the alien symbols etched into the walls. Daniel led the way, his instincts on high alert, while Valara clutched the pulsating device as if it were her lifeline. The hum of the device was growing louder, a low, rhythmic sound that reverberated through the air. "We need to stop," Valara said, her voice trembling. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, his expression impatient. "Stop. In case you forgot, we're being hunted by homicidal aliens." Valara leaned against the wall, her breathing labored. "I'm not used to this," she admitted. "Running, fighting, surviving." Daniel sighed, his frustration softening. "Welcome to the real world, princess. It's not all royal banquets and shiny starships." Valara shot him a glare, but it lacked her usual fire. "You don't understand what's at stake." Daniel crouched down beside her, his tone firm but not unkind. "Then explain it to me. What's this thing you're carrying? And why do those keepers want you dead?" Valara hesitated, her fingers brushing the surface of the device. Its glow reflected in her violet eyes, making her look almost otherworldly. "This is the heart of Kaler," she said finally. "It's a key. My ancestors created it to control the weapon buried on this planet. The keepers believe it's cursed, that it's responsible for the destruction of their world." "And are they right?" Daniel asked, his gaze steady. Valara didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. My people erased the records of what happened here. But if the weapon exists, it's more powerful than anything the galaxy has ever seen, if it falls into the wrong hands." She trailed off, but Daniel understood. "That's why they're after you. They think you're here to activate it." Valara nodded. "And they'll stop at nothing to make sure I don't." Daniel leaned back against the wall, running a hand through his hair. "Well, that's just perfect. So now we're fugitives on a cursed planet with a doomsday device. What's the plan?" Valara looked at him, her expression earnest. The map on the wall in the chamber, it showed the way to the core. "If we can reach it, I might be able to deactivate the weapon." "Might," Daniel repeated, raising an eyebrow. Not exactly inspiring confidence. Valara straightened, her tone sharp. "Do you have a better idea, Sergeant?" Daniel smirked despite himself. "Fair point." He pushed himself to his feet, offering her a hand. "All right, let's find this core. But no more secrets. If we're going to survive, we need to trust each other." Valara hesitated, then took his hand. "Agreed." The tunnel eventually opened into a vast cavern, its walls covered in glowing symbols that pulsed in time with the device in Valara's hands. In the center of the cavern stood a massive structure, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. It seemed alive, its shifting surface casting eerie reflections across the chamber. "This is it," Valara said, her voice filled with awe. "The core." Daniel approached cautiously, his blaster drawn. The air was thick with an electric charge, making the hair on his arms stand on end. "So how do we shut it down?" Valara stepped forward, her hand trembling as she placed the device into a slot on the structure. The symbols on the walls flared to life, illuminating the chamber in a brilliant light. "It's responding," Valara said, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. "I think I can." Her words were cut off by the sound of footsteps echoing through the cavern. Daniel spun around, his blaster aimed at the tunnel they'd just exited. The keepers had found them. The leader of the keepers stepped into the light, its yellow eyes glowing with malice. Behind it, more of its kind emerged, their weapons raised. "You should not have come here," the leader growled. "This place is sacred. Your presence defiles it." Valara turned to face them, her chin held high. "I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to undo the damage my ancestors caused." The leader sneered. "Lies. The heart of Kaler will only bring more death. Your blood is the only way to end this." Daniel stepped in front of Valara, his blaster trained on the leader. You'll have to get through me first. The leader raised its weapon, but before it could fire, the core began to hum, its light intensifying. The ground trembled, and a deep, resonant sound filled the air. The keepers froze, their expressions shifting to fear. "What's happening?" Daniel demanded, glancing at Velara. Velara's hands moved across the device, her face pale. "The core is activating. It's been dormant for centuries, but our presence, it's waking it up." The leader roared, charging toward them. Daniel fired, taking out one of the keepers, but more swarmed in. He grabbed Velara's arm, pulling her toward a narrow passage on the far side of the cavern. "Move," he shouted. As they fled, the core's light grew blinding, and the cavern began to collapse. Velara clutched the device tightly, her mind racing. They had to reach the core's control room, and fast. Ancient secrets. The narrow passage felt like it stretched on forever, the sound of collapsing stone, and the angry shouts of the keepers fading behind them. Daniel and Velara ran, the pulsating light from the device in her hands casting eerie shadows on the walls. The tunnel twisted and turned, but eventually it opened into a smaller chamber. The room was circular, with a console in the center. Alien symbols glowed faintly across its surface, and the air thrummed with energy. Velara stopped, her chest heaving, as she stared at the console in disbelief. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The control room." Daniel didn't waste time. He scanned the chamber, checking every corner for threats. "Are we safe here?" Velara didn't answer. She stepped forward, her fingers brushing the surface of the console. The symbols responded instantly, flaring to life under her touch. Lines of alien text scrolled across the surface, too fast for Daniel to comprehend. "Velara, focus," Daniel urged. "Can you shut it down?" Velara's brow furrowed as she studied the console. "It's more complicated than I thought. The weapon isn't just a bomb or a cannon. It's a network. It's tied to the planet itself." "What does that mean?" Daniel asked, his tone sharp. Velara glanced at him, her expression grim. "It means the weapon is alive. It feeds on the energy of the planet to sustain itself. If I shut it down too quickly, it could destroy everything." Daniel groaned, pacing the room. "Great. So what's the plan?" Velara turned back to the console, her fingers dancing across the symbols. "I need to stabilize it first, then deactivate it piece by piece. It's the only way to keep the planet from tearing itself apart." "How long will that take?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Minutes, maybe hours." Daniel clenched his jaw. "We don't have hours. The keepers will be here any minute." As if on cue, a distant roar echoed through the tunnel, growing louder with each passing second. Daniel spun toward the entrance, his blaster raised. "You need to hurry." Velara's fingers moved faster, her face tense with concentration. "I'm trying, but this system is ancient. If I make a mistake—" "Don't," Daniel interrupted, his voice firm. "No mistakes. Just do what you have to do." The roar grew louder, accompanied by the sound of footsteps. Daniel's heart pounded as he aimed at the dark tunnel. He could see shadows moving, the flicker of glowing yellow eyes. "They're here," he muttered. Velara didn't look up. "I need more time." Daniel positioned himself at the entrance, gripping his blaster tightly. He didn't know how many keepers were coming, but he couldn't let them reach Velara. "You've got it," he said, determination hardening his voice. "I'll hold them off." The first keeper emerged from the shadows, its weapon raised. Daniel fired, hitting it square in the chest. It fell with a grunt, but more followed, their movements fast and coordinated. Daniel ducked behind a rock, returning fire as energy blasts lit up the chamber. "You can't fight them all," Velara called, panic creeping into her voice. "Watch me," Daniel shot back, his blaster spitting out bolts of energy. One keeper fell, then another, but they just kept coming. He was running out of ammo, and his arm ached from the constant recoil. Behind him, Valara's voice rose in frustration. The system is resisting me. It's like it doesn't want to be shut down. Daniel fired another shot, his teeth gritted. Then make it want to. Talk to it. Convince it. Do whatever it is you do, but make it work. Valara glared at him, but didn't argue. She closed her eyes, her hands hovering over the console. A soft glow surrounded her, and for a moment, the air felt charged with an almost supernatural energy. Daniel didn't have time to wonder what she was doing. The leader of the keepers stepped into the chamber, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on him. It carried a massive weapon, something that looked far more advanced than the spears its comrades had used. "Stand aside, human," the leader growled. "This is not your fight." Daniel stood his ground, his blaster aimed at the leader's chest. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The leader tilted its head, as if considering him. So be it. It charged, moving with surprising speed for its size. Daniel fired, but the leader deflected the shot with its weapon. Before he could react, it was on him, knocking the blaster from his hands and pinning him against the wall. "You are brave," the leader said, its voice filled with disdain. "But bravery will not save you." Daniel struggled, his vision swimming as the pressure on his chest increased. Then, a sudden surge of energy filled the room, and the leader staggered back, releasing him. Valara stood by the console, her eyes glowing faintly with the same light as the device in her hands. "Let him go," she said, her voice calm but commanding. The leader snarled, but it didn't attack. Instead, it took a step back, its expression wary. "What have you done?" "I've connected to the core," Valara said. "It's listening to me now." Daniel coughed, pushing himself to his feet. "Nice timing." Valara glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "We're not done yet." The leader growled, raising its weapon, but before it could fire, the ground shook violently. The chamber's walls cracked, and a blinding light erupted from the console. "What's happening?" Daniel shouted. Valara's expression hardened. "The core is destabilizing. We have to move." She grabbed the device, and together they sprinted toward another tunnel that had opened in the chaos. Behind them, the leader of the keepers roared in fury, but it was drowned out by the deafening sound of the collapsing chamber. The passage led them to a new cavern, this one smaller but eerily quiet. Valara stopped, her breathing ragged, and looked at the device in her hands. "The core is partially shut down," she said, "but the weapon is still active. We're not safe yet." Daniel nodded, his gaze steely. "Then let's finish this." The final stand. The smaller cavern felt like a brief refuge, but the tension between Daniel and Valara hung thick in the air. The pulsating glow of the device in Valara's hands grew dimmer, its hum quieter, but still ominous. They both knew the battle was far from over. Daniel leaned against the wall, reloading his blaster with the last power cell he had. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. "So, what's the next move, Princess?" he asked, his voice gruff. Valara looked at him, her face pale but determined. "The core is weakened, but the weapon's energy source is still intact. If I don't neutralize it completely, it'll rebuild itself. And the keepers will never stop hunting us." "Where's the energy source?" Daniel asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. Valara hesitated, then pointed toward a faintly glowing passage on the far side of the cavern. "Through there. It's in the heart of the planet." But what?" Daniel pressed, his eyes narrowing. She swallowed hard. "If we destroy the energy source, this entire place could collapse. We might not make it out alive." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "So it's suicide or letting the galaxy's biggest weapon fall into the wrong hands." "Great options." Valara stepped closer, her voice softer. "I didn't ask for your help, Daniel. You don't have to come with me." Daniel met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "And leave you to handle this alone? Not a chance. Let's finish it." The tunnel leading to the heart of the planet was steep and treacherous, lit only by the faint glow of the alien symbols etched into the walls. The air grew hotter with every step, and the hum of the weapon's energy became almost deafening. As they descended, Daniel's instincts screamed at him to be cautious. He kept his blaster at the ready, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "We're not alone," he muttered. Villara nodded, her own senses heightened. "The Keepers won't let us destroy the source without a fight." They emerged into a massive chamber, the scale of which took Daniel's breath away. At its center was a swirling vortex of energy, a chaotic storm of light and power that pulsed like a living thing. Around it stood the remaining Keepers, their weapons raised and their eyes glowing with fury. The leader stepped forward, its towering frame silhouetted against the swirling energy. "You should have left while you had the chance," it growled. "Now, you will die here." Daniel raised his blaster. "You first." The chamber erupted into chaos. The Keepers charged, their weapons humming with deadly intent. Daniel fired, his shots precise and unrelenting. One Keeper fell, then another, but they just kept coming. Villara darted toward the vortex, clutching the device tightly. The energy crackled around her, sparks flying as she approached the control console at its base. Her fingers moved across the glowing symbols, her focus unwavering despite the battle raging behind her. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Daniel shouted, ducking behind a rock as an energy blast narrowly missed him. "I'm stabilizing the core." Villara called back, her voice trained. "But I need time." Daniel gritted his teeth, taking down another Keeper with a well-placed shot. The leader advanced toward him, its weapon raised, and Daniel had only a split second to react. He dodged the first strike, but the second sent him sprawling to the ground. His blaster skidded out of reach. The leader loomed over him, its glowing eyes filled with malice. "You are brave, human," it said, raising its weapon for the final blow. "But bravery will not save you." Before the weapon could strike, Villara shouted from the console. "Enough." The leader froze, turning toward her. The vortex behind her was shrinking, its light dimming as she manipulated the console. The energy in the room shifted, growing unstable. "You cannot control it," the leader growled. "You will destroy us all." Villara's eyes burned with determination. "Then so be it." With a final keystroke, she activated the device. The vortex exploded outward in a blinding flash of light, and the ground beneath them shook violently. The Keepers cried out, their forms disintegrating as the weapon's energy consumed them. Daniel scrambled to his feet, grabbing Villara's arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." The chamber began to collapse, massive chunks of stone falling from the ceiling. Villara clung to Daniel as they sprinted toward the exit, the roar of destruction echoing around them. The heat was suffocating, the light blinding, but they didn't stop. They burst out of the collapsing tunnel and into the open jungle just as the ground behind them caved in. The weapon's energy erupted into the sky, a brilliant column of light that faded as quickly as it appeared. Then there was silence. Daniel and Villara lay on the ground, gasping for air. The jungle around them was eerily still, the once hostile planet now quiet. "It's done," Villara said, her voice trembling. "The weapon is gone." Daniel sat up, his chest heaving. "Yeah, but we're still stranded on this rock." Villara managed a weak smile. "One problem at a time, Sergeant." Escape and revelation. The jungle was eerily quiet, the stillness a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Daniel sat with his back against a tree, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Beside him, Villara cradled the device, its light now completely extinguished. "For a cursed planet," Daniel muttered, his voice hoarse. "This place sure knows how to throw a party." Villara let out a soft laugh, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "If we hadn't destroyed the weapon, the entire galaxy would have been at risk." Daniel glanced at her, his expression softening. "You did good, Princess." Villara met his gaze, a flicker of gratitude in her tired eyes. We did good. The moment of quiet was broken by a faint hum in the distance. Daniel's ears perked up, and he sat straighter, scanning the sky. Do you hear that? Villara nodded, her antenna-like tendrils twitching. A ship. It's coming this way. Daniel pushed himself to his feet, his muscles protesting every movement. Let's hope it's not more keepers. Villara stood as well, leaning on him for support. Together, they moved to an open clearing where the sound grew louder. The unmistakable shape of a rescue craft broke through the clouds, its searchlights sweeping across the jungle. It's one of ours, Villara exclaimed, relief flooding her voice. The ship landed with a soft hiss, and the ramp lowered. A group of soldiers in sleek armor emerged, their weapons raised but not threatening. At their lead was a tall, silver-skinned alien with a regal bearing. His piercing green eyes locked onto Villara. Princess Villara, the alien said, his voice filled with both relief and urgency. We've been searching for you since the attack. Villara stepped forward, her posture regaining its royal grace. I'm alive, thanks to Sergeant Daniel Carter. The alien's eyes flicked to Daniel, who was still clutching his battered blaster. A human. Interesting. Your bravery will not go unnoticed. Daniel shrugged. Just doing my job. The soldiers escorted them onto the ship, and Daniel collapsed into one of the seats, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. Villara sat across from him, her gaze fixed on the pulsating light of the planet below as the ship ascended. It's strange, she said softly. The weapon is gone, but I feel like this isn't the end. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? Villara held up the now dim device. The heart of Kaler, it's still alive. It shouldn't be. Daniel frowned. You mean there's still something left of the weapon? She shook her head. Not the weapon. Something deeper. Something my ancestors buried even deeper than the core. Daniel leaned back, letting out a long sigh. So, you're saying this might not be over? Villara gave him a small, knowing smile. Not for us. As the ship soared through the stars, Daniel and Villara sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The galaxy was safe for now, but the mysteries of the cursed planet lingered in the air like a shadow. For Daniel, one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of a much larger fight. And whatever came next, he and Villara would face it together.